Welcome back to Fast Market on the TD Ameritrade Network. I'm Tom White, joined by my co-host Kevin Hinks. But let's bring in our next guest for our hashtag segment. It's going to be Megan Brantley, the Vice President of Research at LikeFolio. Thanks for being here today, Megan.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, so we're talking motorcycles. I'm sitting here wondering, how does Harley Davidson transition when everything's turning electric? And it seems like most people that buy Harleys want that big, loud noise driving down the street. I hear it all the time in the city of Chicago here. I'm sure you hear it more down in Kentucky. But what type of sentiment are you seeing for Harley Davidson? Because there's demand out there for cars. They have supply chain issues. But are people still buying motorcycles?
Yeah, so, whenever we look at Harley, I think over the last couple of years, we've talked about how they kind of have this brand image problem. And I think you kind of set the stage for that. Initially, whenever a lot of consumers think of Harley, you think of that, that revving engine, that loud machine. And that was a little bit less attractive for probably younger generations coming up. And so, we've noted that Harley really needed to do a good job promoting its own quality products, promoting its efficiency, promoting things like this to kind of entice this consumer demand again. And we are seeing some noted improvements in Harley Davidson's sentiment. So a couple years ago, Harley's sentiment was down around 65% positive. And whenever we look at it today, we see that that sentiment is near 80% positive. So, a 15-point shift over the course of about 3 years, that's pretty significant for a brand, especially for a brand like Harley Davidson. And we do see some tailwinds here that also suggest that there is some sort of a renewed interest in motorcycles. You can see these mentions of people just talking about buying a motorcycle generically are up by about 53% year over year after a weak year last year. So this is, falling more in line with previous patterns, if not a little bit higher. So a lot of this, just from a gas perspective, I think, motorcycles are a little bit more gas efficient than a traditional vehicle. You have a lot of other things compounding into this. People, after being pent up, want to get back out on the road. We see a lot of that in mentions, a different type of consumer there for sure. But we definitely have started to see somewhat of an inflection point for Harley, at least long term when it comes to sentiment. And we did see that translate in demand, especially earlier this year from, about February and even into March. But, now we're starting to see that demand growth cool down a bit. I think a lot of this has to do with supply chain issues. And the company has even noted this in general, even suspending production for 2 weeks, I think about a month ago. So, we're starting to see, improvements long term for what Harley's doing for its brand in the eyes of consumers. But we see some near-term volatility and some near-term setbacks.
Yeah, Megan, about May 19th to about the week of June 3rd, they stopped production and delivery of vehicles across the country. Here's my question. Your numbers have clearly gotten a little better in Harley Davidson, but I'll give you the numbers that aren't getting better, Megan, and that is the average age of a Harley Davidson owner is 44 years old. 1 in 5 Harley Davidson owners are 55 and older. So they've got a huge demographic problem. Their international sales aren't growing like they like. Their demographic is a big red flag as boomers are aging and the younger groups just aren't, they're not even buying cars. It's not like they're buying cars over motorcycles. They're not buying anything. Right? So, and if they do, I don't see Jenny Horn or Alex Coffey going out and buying a chopper anytime soon. These kids just aren't doing that, right? Let me know if that happens, Tom. That will be news. Yeah. So I think the aging demographic of the motorcycle enthusiast is their biggest problem. And Megan, how do they change that? Because 2 wheels at the end of the day aren't as safe as 4.
Yeah, that is what my father always told me. I think a motorcycle was never even an option in my household growing up.
Yes.
But it's interesting when we look at demand to see kind of a split in the user demographic of people who are talking about Harleys, because we see strength out of its touring brand, which is probably that older demographic that, maybe that you're hitting on. But then we also see strength out of its Livewire brand, which is its electrified brand of motorcycles. We see those mentions up really significantly year over year. So it's interesting. I think that those are definitely two different audience segments, but Harley definitely still has to pitch its value prospect to consumers to get them on 2 wheels versus 4 wheels. And I think on this chart, what's really interesting is, as you can see, Indian Motorcycle, which is the motorcycle brand that falls underneath Polaris's umbrella, seems to be doing a little bit better at this. Now, the volume is very different, so it is impressive that Harley has been able to, increase its sentiment, increase its brand perception and user experience over the past couple of years to get on par with, a smaller brand in our universe. However, you can see it falling behind in that mention growth. And, even, this is looking at a 90-day moving average. If you were to look at this on a 30-day moving average, that mention growth would only be about 6%. I think here it's closer to 12. So we do see a slowdown in this mention growth that is a little bit concerning. And we really see that reflected whenever we track these earnings scores. I think that's a chart that you guys can show, because we started to see them really gain momentum. And then in May, whenever they announced that they were shutting down shipments, and even production, you really start to see that fall off. And so I think that there are a couple of things going on. Maybe there's less availability, but then also you have the added impact of maybe the consumer starting to get stretched. When we look at a lot of our just overall mentions of how purchases are changing for consumers alongside, rising inflation, rising food costs, rising gas costs, we're starting to see consumers shift how they're spending, less and less on these big ticket items in favor of just the essentials and maybe even things like travel, especially here in the near term. And so is this weighing on Harley's growth as well? So those are kind of some headwinds that Harley definitely has to overcome.
Yeah, I think their long-term projections are for that e-bike and the hardwire and rewire lines to kind of get ramped up as far as the millennials and the younger generation goes, electric vehicles. But if you, according to your data, I saw the earnings score, and that kind of stuck out to me. Now, Megan, based on data in a lot of, maybe discretionary item purchases that people are doing, really ramped up over the last couple of years into the end of 2021, but the consumer has shifted, and you guys have talked about that with your data points on multiple companies with us. Can you overlay anything on this chart, this earnings score chart that Harley Davidson has, where it's been in a downtrend for the last couple months? Can you lay recreation vehicles over that, travel over that, anything that's discretionary that consumers don't need due to these inflationary pressures that are squeezing everybody?
Yeah, I think that recreational vehicle purchases, that would be a really good place to look, just these big ticket items potentially slowing down. I think whenever you look at those motorcycle purchases, that trend chart, it's a little bit counterintuitive because it feels like it's up significantly year over year, but it's really because 2021 was so weak. Honestly, it's a little bit more in line. And, we're starting to see, it's already peaked seasonally. We're already just seeing that curve, it's starting to come back down. And if you look at how it looks a little bit skinnier, that length of peak is shorter than in previous years. So it's definitely something to be aware of as the consumer spending just gets squeezed a little bit. We do see mentions of people who are talking about trying to, pull back spending, rise. And so I think that's really important to watch moving forward for Harley, especially as the company itself is facing its own inflationary pressures, impacting its own profitability and things like that. So I think that, long term, we'll keep a close eye on these Harley Davidson mention growth. You can definitely see, while Harley is technically within our neutral range, it's performing, I think, better than some people may have expected. It's starting to wane and it's starting to lose that momentum just near term with the consumer. But long term, I think that there is light at the end of the tunnel for Harley, because we do see these massive improvements in consumer sentiment, and we do see them getting traction with some of these newer lines. So I think that, for now, that this isn't a name that we have any real, actionable trading data for you guys that I can set you up with. But we do see maybe some lights long term for this company if they can continue to, attract this younger audience and kind of leverage this newer brand for themselves.
Yeah, and if you go around the city of Chicago, everybody's on a scooter, 2 wheels. Everybody's got these bikes that are electric now. They don't even have to pedal them. So maybe that equates into long term where that type of consumer, that younger generation, starts buying motorcycles and electric ones from Harley. What to wait and see on that. But great stuff, as always, Megan. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
All right, that's Megan Brantley, the Vice President of Research at LikeFolio, helping us break it down. Kevin, that